Hey everyone, welcome to 4coder Friday. Today we're working on getting all of the old features back that we lost when we cut the old GUI system. Let me just show you the state of it, because it's been a couple weeks since I streamed and I stayed active on the project, actually making progress the whole time. So there is some new stuff. I also have a new OBS setup today, new monitor, slightly higher resolution, so things on Visual Studio might look smaller. I upped 4coder's font size to compensate, but you might notice like the command line in Visual Studio looks really small. I'm going to try to zoom in here as well to fix that, but I don't know how to like increase this font size, for instance. If there's a way to do it, I would do it, but I don't know what it is. Alright. So, I'm going to... If anyone in the chat happens to know or looks it up and wants to let me know, go ahead. I guess while I'm doing this, one thing I should do is... I should track down and change the config. Or you know what I'll do? There we go. So that you guys can read my test case when it comes up. There we go. Bigger font. And now here what I can do is the switch command still works. All the other commands are missing because the switch command is the one I wrote to test the new lister system. I can't like control open anymore because that list isn't implemented anywhere, and I can control F, and so that part of the GUI still works, or I got it working again. If I load project, that's a method I can use to open a bunch of files, and now I can switch through that, and you can see that scrolling works, mouse hovering works. Let's bring up home.txt. Uh-oh, that brought up the wrong thing. So that brought up the right thing. So we do have some bugs to deal with. That's not really a surprise. I just forgot about it when I was demoing it just now. It's not DPI scaled. So Flying Solomon, it's not that it's DPI scaled. The monitor is running at the same DPI as what you normally, as what my other monitor is running at. It's just that it's a wider resolution, and so when it squeezes down to 1080p on your screen, it looks smaller. That's what I mean by bigger resolution. Not higher dots per inch, but just the width and height. I mean, this is Windows 7, so it can't do per monitor scaling anyway. Yeah, that's not bringing up the right thing when I click. I suspect that what's happening is it's bringing up what I would have gotten if I hadn't scrolled. Yeah, so here we can see that I'm hovering Handmade Hero. I scroll all the way down here and I click and it brings up Handmade Hero. Alright, so let's fix that first. The mouse needs to be shifted by the scroll amount when I click. And why isn't it? Because I see right here mx equals mouse state minus the file region, so that puts us within the file region is everything inside the like where the file starts. Like if this is here, the file region starts here. If this is here, the file region starts here. These don't actually affect the file region, which is why it doesn't shift down when you are putting those in, which might be a mistake. Maybe I want that to affect the file region. Who knows? But right now it doesn't affect the file region. And then scroll bars, dot scroll And then I subtract out the scrolling position, or I added it in. Oh, that's right, because if I'm scrolled down 200 pixels, then my Y needs to be larger. Okay. Now, if I come down here, right, I'm not doing that there. So what I should probably do, well, I mean, for starters, I can just say, let's do that math again right here. Except that it's not mouse state anyway, it's in.mouse. Right? So that should fix that. And then I want to start thinking about the API users will have to use. Like, I want to start thinking about layering this API. So that's the kind of thing where I'm looking at that going, maybe the custom layer needs a helper for computing relative mouse position from the absolute mouse position and the view summary, right? That doesn't seem like a particularly poor idea for a helper. Alright, first I need to load project. And then I need to scroll down, click something right here, and we got the render target. Okay, so that was my first bug. I want to, before we call that done, start organizing this effort a little bit differently. So right now this is all going in base commands. We're now going to go 4coder default lists, or yeah, default lists, or lists. Yeah, we'll just go with lists for now. I went outside, it's kind of bright, and my eyes feel like they're still adjusting. Or like maybe I looked at the sun a little bit or something, I don't know. Like I got the like spot floating in front of my face. Let's see. List helpers and list commands. That's pretty good description, but I'm going to go a little further, such as open files, switch buffer, or kill buffer. Alright, Flying Solomon asks, unrelated question, how do you use FreeType? You use it to generate glyph tables and do the positioning yourself? Yeah, so all of the font systems I've ever written, I always do the layout system myself. And all I do with all I ever want the font system for is rasterizing. Full font layout is pretty complicated, so if I was ever going to, for instance, support right to left text, I might not go that far. I might be willing to look at using someone else's layout system, but I tend to find that the part of the API that is really done well is always the rasterizer part, and the layout part is always not quite what you actually need. It's not good enough to just say, here's a string, render it. You need to get all kinds of metrics back. What you really want to be able to do is say, here's a string, give me a full description of how you laid it out, and don't render it, and let me investigate that layout for a while and maybe tweak it, and then I'll send the layout to the render part later. This lets you do things like figuring out the place the cursor needs to go on a screen and stuff when you click, and it lets you figure out where to wrap the lines and whatnot. So maybe FreeType has stuff that starts to get close to that, but for the most part I find it's just easier to take the those APIs out of that, because every API does the rasterization part in pretty much the same way. So if you want to make a module, you can just drop in DirectWrite, or you just drop in, like, I don't know, Mac, whatever Mac does for its text rendering, and you not have to change too much. That's the part of the API where you want to be, like, where you can count on the being able to get the same data with the same meaning, even if it's not the same data on every platform or every library. It's got the same basic data format that it will describe things to you with, right? And then when you get to the layout part, everyone's just kind of giving you whatever, they're giving you whatever information they happen to feel like giving you. Sometimes they give you a lot, sometimes they don't give you a lot, sometimes they don't give you any, sometimes they give you things that the other people don't give you, and so if you base your API on having that information and then you try to drop someone else in, it won't be possible. It's pretty hard to write an abstraction around the layout part, in my opinion. That unless you control, it's easy to write a layout abstraction. It's just not easy to abstract other people's layout abstractions that are all different. Alright, so I want to move this into there now. You know, I'll take that with it. So there's our dummy API exploration version of interactive switch buffer, and we are going to all of these are actually going to go. So what we're going to do is here's where we'll start putting helpers in a little bit, and I'm going to start making a to-do list of like code organization stuff. Kill old command IDs, transfer command ID wrappers to list file, stubs. Alright. But first we're going to finish cleaning up this interactive switch buffer stuff. So what this needs is what was it? The mouse thing, right? Get mouse position view relative, and so this is going to take x absolute, y absolute, get view relative mouse position, that's what I should call it. View summary view, and then mx and my will be these things. X absolute, Y absolute, X out, Y out, mouse state.x, mouse state.y, very good, and then we can just do get view relative mouse position, like that. MacGod asks, will you support software rendering? There's a chance that I will. I mean, I'm basically moving to a situation where 4coder only ever renders two types of things, which are solid color rectangles and glyphs, which is pretty achievable in a software renderer. So actually, I don't see why I wouldn't eventually support that as like a fallback for when other renderers fail. Basically, my plan right now is I have only one renderer, which is OpenGL, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a pretty big priority these days to get off of that. Like, I need at least the flexibility to drop in other renderers, because like on Mac I can't stand OpenGL at all, and on Windows it causes problems that would probably be solved if I upgraded my OpenGL version or just used DirectX instead. And you know, there might be other platforms that I want it to just work on that, you know, for whatever reason the graphics initialization fails. I could always drop down to software, right? And that shouldn't be impossible. I don't know. It's not really a high priority to do software rendering, but it is a high priority to look at the rendering system and make it modular so that things like that can get dropped in as needed. Oh yeah, there's a good reason for why software rendering should be supported. Good point. Also, emulators tend to work better when they're not going through hardware rendering. Perfect. Okay. So that's pretty nice. Yeah, I agree, Flying Solomon. I was thinking that the whole time, which is that in addition to software rendering, another big thing is the shell version, which the hard part about a shell version is that it's not as straightforward as just swapping out the renderer. I mean, you could make it that straightforward, but it's gonna make a weird result, I think, if I do. It's possible, though. It's just that, what do you convert some of the commands into? Like, 4coder's render commands involve, like, pushing rectangles. you would kind of want to push through deeper than just the renderer. You'd want to go into the logic and tell it to do certain things differently when it knows that it's in terminal mode. Like, you would want it to not put these margins on ever, or something like this, and maybe put something else in place of those margins. And you would want it to maybe think differently about what it means by a background color altogether, and you'd want it to think differently about smooth scrolling, probably not use it, right? Plus the input layer for that is just totally different. Okay. So that's one of the two big scrolling things I needed to fix. The other big scrolling thing I needed to fix, the other thing I need to fix, I'm trying to read one of my to-do lists. I can't quite read it. It's from like 2 weeks ago and I can't remember what it says. Don't overload the button list with something that scrolled up. With, what is that? With items? Oh, yeah. I know what that's talking about. It shouldn't say overload though. Hold on. It should say don't. Let me just cross that out because that's not really explained correctly. I want it to say something like don't overfill with off-screen items. Yeah, okay. So before I do that, the other thing I want to do that's a little easier is during scrolling and moving up and down, what can happen is see, I can scroll down and it doesn't keep the selected item on the list. I can move the selected item in the view independently, which isn't really something you ever want to do. At least that's not the way 4coder has always worked. So we're tasked with the problem of making a nice, easy way for the user to code that they want these things to stay linked. And that shouldn't be too hard. But it's kind of gonna be, because we want to do it in a good way. So first of all, we have item index counter, no, item index. Alright, so we want to be able to update the item index. And when we do any of these things, we update the item index, right? So what I probably should do is read this code first of all. Activated item equals highlighted item. Backspace, item index equals 0. Item index equals item index minus 1. Needs full update. Right. So I want to basically be able to do the following things. I want to be able to say scroll 0 somehow. I want to be able to say scroll move to contain item. Scroll 0. There's no white space anywhere in there. That's not very good. Alright, mouse. Here what's happening is if they press that or that, they click, and if they have the wheel, they set scroll, and they want to be able to selected index item move to be in scroll in view. And scroll, right? Those are the basic things I need to be able to do. Now to do those, for now I'm just going to put them in, but we're going to end up wanting a kind of generalized way to talk about that when we get to the point where we're making multiples of these lists. Maybe it'll just be a part of the core system that they're all based on. It'll never be abstracted out, actually. That's a possibility. At least in the case of moving the scroll to the item, there's some pretty basic abstraction we can make that'll apply to a lot of stuff. Moving the item inside of the scroll is a little bit trickier. There are some ways we could do it though, but there's some ways we could abstract that. Alright, the easy one is scroll 0. So let's start implementing these three basic things that the API needs to be able to support. Well, we already have a set scroll thing. Let me pull up 4coder.com. 4coder.net, I guess, still. View set scroll. Hopefully this is big enough for you guys to read it at about that point. Yeah, we're just going to zero out all of that. So, perfect, okay. So that'll let me zero out the scroll whenever we are like resetting the list. Scroll move to contain item. So I don't know, I don't really want that yet. So what this could get replaced with is a matter of pick the rectangle that we want to make sure is in the view and do the minimal amount of scrolling necessary to get it in the view. So I'm going to draw a picture of this just so that I can keep it clear in my head and so that you all know what I'm talking about. New Milton canvas, yes? No? Alright, how can I set the background? There we go. That's nice. And then I will set my brush to white. Alright, so yeah, alright. So basically what's happening is we have the view. Well, I don't want to draw that too big. First of all, we have the UI, which I'm going to conceptualize as looking like this. Right? This long, narrow thing that you can scroll down. And then you have a view, which inspects some portion of it. Right? And that view can move around inside this UI space, and then we can set inside that view there's some kind of like main region that looks like this. And then we can want to be able to say, alright, here is a rectangle like this, right? And that rectangle is special. It's the thing we want to target. So I then say move this thing to focus on this. And so what I want that to basically turn into is it looks and says, does this thing fit inside this? If so, we're done. If it doesn't fit inside of it but it collides with it, we might want to adjust a little bit to collide with it as much as we can. And so what that would involve is this and this are colliding as much as they can. When we look at the width and height of this thing and we clip them by this and say that that much area of them is overlapped. Right? So we can't fit this whole thing inside this, but we can say, alright, this portion to this portion here, right, or any portion of this rectangle with that same width, as long as that much width is covered and the entire height is covered, then it's contained in there. If it's not, adjust until that is the case. Then, if it's not, okay, so that's basically it. That's the condition. We start by making the constraint. We start by deducing the constraints, which are how much of the width and how much of the height need to be overlapping for it to count. We then check, does it count as being viewed right now or not? Yes or no. If it is being viewed already, then there's another way I could do this that might be better. I could do a height-based thing and a width-based thing. If I did it that way, then I would consider this like this. And I would say, when I'm trying to fit this and this, I just go, does this interval completely fall inside this? Or can it, first of all? If it can, then we do the logic of line the bottom of this up with the bottom of this, or line the top of this up with the top of this, depending on whether we're scrolling up or down. Or do nothing if it's fully contained. If this can't be fully contained in there, then take the top to the top, no matter which direction you're going. Yeah. Okay. Application links, app, view summary, view, int32t y min, int32t y max. And now I need to make sure I can actually get that information before I go and implement it. Where do I get the ymin and the ymax in each of these cases? Well, in each of those cases I have an item index. And how I normally turn the item index into an item is I do it during this iteration here. So this part is a little bit annoying because I don't have a data structure that really maps item indexes to items directly, which means it's not clear how I can get the rectangle for a given index easily. But that doesn't have to be a problem. Rather than setting this here, I can just set a flag that says do this on the next iteration. Right? Because we don't actually learn the information we need until that iteration. Set vertical focus to view. To item. Set item index to inside view, and so then this can be view set or set view vertical focus to item equals true. And so can be this. And then up here, what we do is we go, alright, if, whoops, then we do this. I guess this can go in, no, it's got to go right here though, because we want to immediately set this to false the moment that we're done with it. So and then we're going to set the vertical focus, which just means we need the ymin and ymax, which we can get because we have the highlighted item. So I go to types .h, highlighted item, rectangle y0, y1, okay. And now we just need to implement the set vertical focus function to get that part working. So to set vertical focus, what we're going to have to do is view get scroll. Oh, that's already in the view summary, right? So GUI scroll vars scroll equals view scroll vars, I believe. Yeah. So it has its scroll bars right there. And then we need to investigate a couple of things. So we want to get the view y top equals scroll dot target y. Okay, and then to get the other thing, we need view y bottom to be the top plus the views, and then we need the view summary again, file region. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is we want to say, what situation are we in terms of what is the y dim of our object here. If y dim is greater than the view y dim, then when we're doing this, we're always just going to set scroll dot target y to y min, and then we're going to view set scroll onto that view. Otherwise, what we're going to do gets a little more complicated because we don't necessarily want to change the view at all. And I guess here, no, I think that was already taken care of internally. I'll do it that way. So here, y dim fully fits inside there. So first we want to see if it is already fully inside there, right? So if y min is less than view y top, then what we'll do is we'll set scroll dot target y to equal the y min, but that's actually not quite right. I don't want to put these right on top of the view. I want to put them right. Hot y top equals to view y top plus, I don't know, just give it a fixed skirt. View y bottom thinking this through. So there we have that. I'm trying to think about if I want to do 30 or if that would work when I mean, obviously when the view gets small enough, I have to change this. Do I have line height? Yes. There we go. This is cool. Then we'll do ydim, and then hot y top will equal view y top plus a little bit of quarter view dim. And then you can be top view y bot. Bot minus top is less than that times 6. Then get the quarter view y dim and set the top and bot like that. And then what we do is we say skirt dimension, right? Okay, and then in this one, if y min is less than hot y top, yeah, okay. So if this is wide enough that it won't fit into the focus area anyway, then we just take the top of the view and we put it such that it puts the top of the focus on the y min. Whenever you want to put something onto a focus, you take that thing and you subtract or add the skirt dimension, which is how much extra space you give between that and the actual top. Right, okay. Yep, that looks correct. And so if the y min that we're looking for, if the item we're trying to focus on will fit, but the top of it is above the top of the focus line, then we set that like that, and we set scroll like that. If the bottom is larger than the hot Y bot, like the bottom of the, really these should be renamed. Then if the bottom is greater than the area's bottom, then what we want to do is take target Y to equal the Y bottom minus the view Y dimension plus the skirt dimension. Right? Or another way to look at it is that we're taking this plus the extra skirt dimension and then subtracting the whole height of the view to get the top of the view, and then we're setting the scroll there. Yeah, Jim, I realized as soon as I said it that I was saying a bunch of stuff about hot bottoms. I don't know, I was hoping no one was watching. Alright. Alright, these need to be int 32s. Alright, so the final thing we need to talk about is how we do it the other way around. I want to say, basically unbind the active item index and let it be changed if it needs to be so that it fits in the view. Yeah. It's going to be a little bit tricky to implement in a super general way. So, some options include this. I could build the whole data structure and then find the item that fits into the view. Like, check if the current item fits in the view. If not, find an item close to it that fits into the view, into the focus range. But once I have that item, how do I get back to the item index? Because like I said, I only get the item index paired to the items for that moment when I'm still iterating them at the beginning. If I have to iterate them and then analyze them to find the right one, then I've passed the moment when I have the index to item mapping available to me. I could solve all of this by just writing down that index to item mapping into some memory so that I would remember it later, and then I could find the item, search through the index to item array until I find that item, and then I have the index. But that's adding a list, and it's no good. Another option is during the loop through I can do this work. So while I have that information handy with me, I will check and go, alright, here's what the index used to be. Here's the index I'm at right now. Did the index that I'm used to be happen to be too far above or below? I would need to have an answer to that right away. Like, I guess one thing that's tricky about this is, how do I know that the item won't fit in time? Right? I need a way to check and see, did this item actually fall outside of the view? And if it did, how do I decide whether I want something near the top or bottom of the view to go with it? And if I have the answer to that, how do I actually get the one near the top or bottom that fits inside the view? a lot of stuff. Let me think. Let me just close my eyes and visualize what this should be like. So for one thing, a lot of programs don't actually do what I'm trying to do. Like here my cursor is. If I scroll off, I'm now without the cursor. It's up there. If I press down, it moves me to the cursor, but it never moves my cursor to the view, which is sort of the 4coder thing of always keep the two together. No matter which one moves, the other one moves to it. But a lot of people just do, the view will move to the cursor whenever the cursor does something new, but if the view moves away from the cursor just stays there, which means you can scroll around for a while and then hit up and you're back to where you started, which is actually kind of a nice trick. The only disadvantage is if you're scrolling through and then you see the one you want, but if you're already touching your mouse to scroll, you probably click where you want to land. So actually I'm going to say change in the 4coder behavior maybe. Let's say that we don't do this anymore. We don't go this direction. You're allowed to scroll and move away from the item, but if the item ever changes, we update the scroll to see it. And this is just for the list, not for this yet. Maybe someday I'll change this too so that the cursor stays put when you're moving around. I don't know. The 4coder philosophy has always been to keep the two together so you always see your cursor, but maybe that's wrong. I don't know. Let's see if I'm happy with it this way. I don't know. Thoughts from the folks in the chat would be useful on that, because I don't actually know if anyone cares about that binding between view and cursor, where you can scroll and keep your cursor in view the whole time. So there, I scroll and the cursor's not in view, but then I move the cursor around and it stays in view, which is nice. I can scroll off and go, oh, I'm going to click this one and then hit down. I can page down and page up, just move me one at a time still. And I don't wrap. Yeah, for in the buffer, that's one thing. But I'm talking about in these lists. I don't think anyone ever relies on the fact that they can scroll and then use the arrow keys here, right? Like right now, if you scroll and then use the arrow key, it takes you back to where you were, which is new. It used to be that if you scrolled, it would keep this highlighted item in the view. I don't know. I'm thinking that once you're already scrolling, why would you ever care that you have to click to finish? That's what you're probably gonna do anyway. So you might as well lose that, and then if you want to, you can do this. Or, oh, do you know what I just noticed? This field up here falls off, doesn't it? So if I'm down here and I type Win32, it comes back because I've scrolled down. But if I'm like here and I scroll down, that's way up there, and then I can type 4ed, it comes back, but I've lost it until then. So if I then scroll down, I'm like, okay, did I type the underscore? I don't know. Let me just say buffer. Oh, I didn't type the underscore. Okay, right? So I think I need to fix that. Okay, so to fix that, what I have to do is right here, I want to get the, what is it, view dot scrollvars dot scroll y as an int 32, Load a project. Weird. That's weird, right? It's like it updates the scroll position. Oh, it updates the scroll position and then it updates the scroll position and then it puts the it does the render. So it renders it puts the rectangle down before it processes input. Wait a minute. We update the scroll position. I mean, I don't know. It falls behind and then it snaps to position. What's happening there? Flying Solomon, yeah, I totally plan on exposing the undo system. That's the next big thing after the GUI stuff. That plan hasn't changed. And I agree, pushing undo point and popping undo point is the way to group things together for undo purposes easily. Batch edit isn't just about that. Batch edit is also an optimization for when you can easily build a batch, because as a batch edit, there's a bunch of maintenance it has to do before and after the actual text replacements, and so it basically says don't do all of those maintenance things until after all of these edits have happened. So when you can batch shoot for big edits, like if I use a batch edit when I'm going to do something that could touch the whole file, like it's going to update the white space at the beginning of every single line and convert spaces to tabs, then I turn that into a batch just so that it doesn't do each line individually and then do the metadata before and after every single time, but just do one metadata, all of the text, and then one metadata at the end, right? But for undo, redo purposes, that just happens to make it group together, but that's not the API you want for undo, redo purposes. For undo, redo, you really want to be able to say begin a batch, and then arbitrary stuff, like begin a group. And the reason you want it that way is because then you can call other people's commands that don't know they're a part of a group, have them do some edits, and you could call their command, do an edit, call someone else's command, do an edit, and then end the group, and now all of those edits are in one group that gets undone together. Yeah, replace in range is for when you don't want to do the... Replace in range is basically convenience, because I could do everything through a batch of replace in ranges. A batch is basically does several replaces in range with just one metadata calculation afterwards. So the only reason I support replace in range really is so that you don't have to do the more annoying work of allocating the... It's the difference between being able to pass one thing bundled or being able to pass the argument separately, right? Because for replace in range, you specify the begin, the end, and the string to put in that range. For batch edit, you specify an array of targets, which are the begin and end for this particular edit, and the string to replace it with. And since it's a batch of strings, that string to replace it with. Another advantage of the replace batch thing is, say you're doing like a convert tabs to spaces thing, then the only string you need is enough spaces to indicate the most number of spaces you ever need to write, and you can actually have all of your batches reference into that one single big string for their source. And so you couple with that a length, right? And so you say, here's where my string begins and the length of my string, and that's in this other thing that's batched together. It's much harder to call. So yeah, replace in range is really a convenience thing. I need to figure out why that lags behind. So I set it to go wherever the scroll Y is, but that's not good enough. Why? Why is that not good enough? Because the scroll Y animates while the we set the scroll there. So we get some input, we set the scroll, and then we we get some input. We set that to the current scroll value, but we don't get woken up again until much later. So I guess the real question is, what input are we getting that's even waking us up? Yeah, this is one of those things that gets hard. So let's do it this way. Maybe I need to say needs full update whenever I set the scroll to. Yeah, okay, let's try that. Well, that's weird. What's going wrong here? Oh, I must have changed it over there. Whoops. You stop making edits. Okay. So let's try that. Load the project. It still falls behind. I have to assume that's just because it doesn't get a notification that wakes it up every single time when it's scrolling. How do I want to fix that, though? I guess a part of the problem here is, given any item, it might want to be scrolled, but it might actually want to be in absolute coordinates. And what I'd really like to say is that that's just in absolute coordinates, right? Because then I wouldn't have to do this goofiness. So let's add a new feature today, shall we? Okay. So this can go back to just saying that it's 0 and that's fine. and all we have to do to make that work is say that it's in absolute coordinates, right? Except that now, when I go to UI helper, we're going to see a couple of problems. Particularly, get mouse hit. Because what we're going to want to have is mx, my relative, and absolute to be separate. If item uses absolute coordinates, we'll do this. Otherwise, we'll do this. And then we'll, for these ones, do this. That's not really correct, though. It's not relative and absolute. It's scrolled and not really absolute. It's relative. I'm just going to call it unscrolled. You know, I don't know what'll happen with the rad debugger. I'm not really working on the part that determines whether or not it ends up on Windows or Linux or anything, although I think that there's talk about that. I don't know. Wait, that whole function is ridiculous, isn't it? Okay, I see what I want to do. You guys just hang on tight, we're getting rid of you. You guys come down here, we are going... Wait, that's still correct. Do that. And then have this one here. Just do mouse.x, mouse.y. So you're right. Yeah, but I don't care about the performance implications of that right now. So what we'll do is we'll just make some wrappers instead. There we go. Yeah, I agree with your API analysis that you don't necessarily want to couple X and Y every time you call, but I don't necessarily care about the performance implications of only wanting to do one of those two computations, because this is not that kind of code right now. If you're using one of these helpers and you find that it's too slow, then just do the math yourself in line there and figure out how to speed it up. I don't need to write this code in a bunch of like spread out nasty ways. I can just reduce this API thing to this thing. It's better that way. Okay. Now, and this way the user doesn't have to think about whether or not they need to send the real Y value in order to get an answer. They can just trust that I've thought about how to leverage this API to get just the X value or just the Y value. Okay, so what should we do next? I think the question is, we're adding this coordinate thing. Yeah, so to do this coordinate thing, we want to go to 4ed view UI, and we want to look at when we are doing this stuff. So I guess these don't care. The step file view thing basically doesn't even look at other widgets anymore. It doesn't look at the layout at all. It basically just asks, do I render a file, or do I have a file showing or not? And does some stuff, if it does more stuff than it normally does if there is a file showing. But other than that, it just updates the scroll, it responds to the wheel automatically, which I think I will remove sooner rather than later, maybe before this build ships. Make that a command. Yeah, okay. Ooh, more code that I get to delete. Perfect. That's how we render the file view. Okay. So now, we put down that. We put down the query bars. And then we clip the rest underneath the query bars, and we go either draw the file, or if we're doing the loop, we do this, and then right, I see. If not, item unscrolled coordinates. This will go right here. This will go right here, and this will go right here. View summer X. There's always some hitch when you try to convert all your X's to Y's or all your Y's to X's. Something always gets you. Alright, just a couple more changes. So I'm not calling these unscrolled coordinates. I'm going to call these view relative coordinates. Or just view coordinates in most of the code. That's a mistake. You know how to do ordinate system conversions, right? Or should I say ordinate system inversions? Alright, now that's always on top. I want to make sure that if I click it, it doesn't actually click the thing underneath it. Weird, it clicked nothing instead of, like, it clicked scratch, or I guess that's just picking the thing that's already there. So let me pick this, and then boom. Remapping commands. Boom. Remapping commands. Yeah. Alright, so when I click the bar right there, it does the right thing and returns it to me, not the nonsense, but I don't want it to exit when I click that. So let's take a look at why that's happening. Lists. Let's see. Do, 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 do. Where is that? So the click happens, I guess, down here when I'm processing input. The loop here is weird because, like, you render by setting up your thing, and then you grab input, and that grab input is the thing that actually yields your it yields you, and then you get more input. But it makes sense. You have to show something on the screen, and then the user will input something that you handle. You don't normally in a game loop. You actually grab input and then render. It doesn't. It's kind of irrelevant which order you do it in, except that if you render first, they see something right away. Whereas if I were to grab input first, I would have like blank, and then some input comes in, and then they can see the UI. Which I feel like games have sort of a tradition of getting it wrong. Technically, they should probably render first, and then at least render, not necessarily render first in the loop, but render something before you grab input. That's all I'm saying. Render something before you even show the window, so that it's not like the empty window frame. You know? You gotta know? Okay, so that's the trick right there. It's coming back and the user data is 0, and so nothing happens. Okay, so perfect. Okay, so whoops, didn't mean to go full screen there. Keep item in the view during scroll. Alright, we have one last thing to do, and basically once that last thing is done, my first hacky replacement of one of these lists is done, and I'll call this the end of the first stream. And then when we come back, we'll probably start unhacking it and making the full version that actually we can base the rest of the replacements on. So I'll explain more of that later, but the last thing we want to get right before we call this section of the work done is right now it submits the entire list, but there's no reason that it should actually do that. Basically, we want to skip everything in the list that is off screen, I guess, right? And now, basically, the hard part is we have two different things that are sort of relating to each other, two different filters that are both applying, and they're hard to get both in there simultaneously. It's hard to get both of them in there simultaneously. One of the filters is the filter for the has a substring, right? If this file buffer name has a substring that matches the thing we've typed in, it goes into the list. Then the second filter is it should only show up in the list if it's between this index and that index. And right now I'm doing this in one loop. I have one loop, it checks the string and then emits a rectangle. Checks a string, emits a rectangle. If I wanted to, or emits an item I should say, if I wanted to look at this more carefully, I would say first of all, each item I emit is a very big structure, and it takes a lot of I don't want to say a lot of work, but it takes more work to render and to do point tests for every item I add. So reducing the number of items I add is a win. So one thing I could do is just keep the loop I've already got and check the rectangles, and if a rectangle is fully outside of the view, don't use it. This would work pretty well, I think. Be straightforward enough. Another option is it's much more lightweight to create an array of buffer IDs and say that array of buffer IDs is the array of buffer IDs that could potentially be allowed to show up in the list. And then separately iterate that second list using an index range that we can compute directly. The second method has some advantages. It lets us we don't get to skip ahead in the sense that, okay, so the disadvantage to it, we could figure out what the last last possible index we ever need is first. So figure out our index range. We want indexes this to this, then compute all of the indexes from 0 to the end index, and then for the indexes in the range of that, from the start index to the end index, which might not be 0 to the start end index, but from the start index to the end index, emit the items. That's the fully minimal way of getting this done. However, I'm realizing that that won't abstract as well when I try to make this work for files and buffer names simultaneously. So I'm actually going to say, let me just write down that basic structure and we'll figure out exactly how to make that work later. The reason I don't want to do this is, like I said, the same exact logic has to be applied when we make file lists, and if we ever make lists of like commands or anything, all that same logic needs to apply. And so I don't want to end up implementing that in a bunch of specialized ways. I want to kind of wait until I'm building the several of these things with differences between them. Once I have several different examples of different use cases of the same thing, then I'll feel more comfortable abstracting this down into one or two calls or data formats or something. So step 1, discover the first and last indexes you want to emit from item height view height and scroll position. Step 2, generate a filtered list of references, and we have to start from 0 because if we don't, since we have to start from 0 when we generate the filtered list, because we need to know how many things we don't know. We can easily tell, if we made a single list of everything unfiltered, then we wouldn't have to do an extra pass to go from 0 to something, from 0 to the last thing on the screen, because we already know the indexes of everything. But when we're applying a filter first, we're making a new array whose indexes we don't actually know. We don't know the indexes, how these things will lay out until we've laid them all out, right? We don't know how they'll sort of sort out. So the optimized version of this would keep the filtered list around until the filtered list needs to change, and then it would recompute its filtered list every single time the filter list changes. But it would operate the way you would expect besides that, which is that it has an array and it generates the first and last index and then iterates those every single time. So the UI layout part will look nice and clean, and the filtered list will just be the complete filtered list, at least computed out to a certain index that we need. And this isn't really something that has directly to do with the UI API directly, as much as it is about the helpers we write for it. So I'm not too worried about sorry, one second. I'm not too worried about it at the moment. Like, presently it's being handled, I think is what I was going to say. Sorry, I'm trying to talk and write at the same time, and I'm writing something different. That are in the view. Okay. Another thing I've just realized is I have a bounding box that contains all of the rectangles in the UI control here, but this isn't quite right anymore because we have rectangles that have different coordinate systems. So really what I want is i32 rect bounding box UI coordinates count. Right? And there we go. That'll change things up quite a bit. Yeah, so what we're going to want to do is leave those the way they are for now, and then for each item, if we don't really need that. What we need is UI bounding box union control.bounding box item, we'll call this coordinates, UI coordinate system coordinates equals item coordinates, if coordinates types UN32, if coordinates is greater than or equal to UI coordinates count, then we'll just stick it into the default one. What kind of free type bugs are you hitting? I assume you mean bugs in your free type code and not free type bugs, right? Is that right? Or are you actually hitting free type bugs, which is not impossible? Okay, and then there's one other little concern, which is we need the negative infinite rectangle. Do I have max int stuff sitting around here? I don't think I do. I'm just going to write them directly in right now. 32-bit integer max value. There we go. Oh yeah. Okay, someone forgot to make this work in C++. So, you want me to int64t that, and then int32t that? Is that what will make you happy? Memset bounding box size of bounding box. Sorry, I meant mem copy. UI coordinates scrolled. XX the Big Fo XX asks, is there any plan to add more customizability to customizable colored keywords? Yeah, for sure. In the new engine, which is going to come out in a year or so, there will be basically I don't know exactly how I want to put this, but as much customization power as any other editor has ever given you will be available in that version. What we have now is about all you'll have until maybe this time 2019, though, because everything's based on an engine that just doesn't really support that much. I shouldn't say this time. Well, yeah, maybe this time 2019 or so we'll have a new engine that will put a lot more power on the user to control what goes onto the screen. Alright, so I'm looking at this, by the way, which has stuff from standard int that I could use. So I guess int 32 min and int 32 max would do what I needed. Let's try it. Hey, alright. So there we go. I think that that's everything we can do in terms of... Oops. I want to see the lists stuff that we just started today. I think that's everything we can do in terms of fixing this up to make it as close as possible to the old way that things used to work, while still making some changes for sake of making it easy to implement and possibly improving it. In that, when I say that, I'm referring to the fact that we no longer keep the item inside the scrolled region. It's not necessarily better for any particular reason. I don't think the snapback property is actually any good, but I also don't think it hurts anyone, and it's easier to implement. And so in that case, I think that was the right call. But you know, now that I think about it, there is still something that we haven't done, which is with item index here. And in order to do that correctly, I need to know the full count, which I don't think I'd know. Actually, I do know it, so I could get it right for now, but I know it for the wrong reasons. But that's fine. I just want to see that in action. And then the next big thing is, right now I'm only running this out of a coroutine, but there's no reason that I have to run it out of a coroutine. So I want to get this working where it creates a sort of a mode that it goes into, that the command map gets changed to the list handler command map, and then it runs the list, and then see if we can't make some progress on knocking out all these lists once that abstraction is in place. Although we'll probably do some back and forth, as you would expect. Looks solid to me. We don't have that in there yet either, the wildcarding. Just because I say the word mode doesn't mean it's modal. Don't be like that. Yeah, okay. So that's everything for now. I'll be back later today to get more of this stuff done. See you then.